So the next speaker is the founder and international VP of Orchard. And this is the largest digital entertainment distributor in the world with offices in more than 25 countries. So the future is not how it used to be, but it still smells like Teen Spirit. Please, warm welcome to Scott Cohen. Scott, warm welcome. We had the great pleasure to have you in Sofia a couple of months ago, and here we are now in Istanbul. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So in 1857, this gentleman, Edward Leon Scott de Martinville, invented this machine. Quite an amazing machine. It was the first machine to record sound, the first ever sound recording device. It had one little bit of a problem, a flaw in its construction is, although it could record sound, it couldn't play back sound. We had to wait nearly 20 years for Thomas Edison to invent the phonograph, which then transformed the way creators created music. Because until then, they were creating long pieces of music, but the technology said you could only record 2 or 3 minutes at a time. So creators started creating new forms of content that we know today as songs so that they could record. But let's take you back a little further in time to a different kind of technology, which is biological technology. So this gentleman here, Philip Lieberman, in 2007, published a piece called The Evolution of Human Speech. And what he wanted to know was, when did speech begin in humans? When could we produce complex sounds? So what he did was he started to look at the fossil records. He was looking at skulls and the jaws. He wanted to see how the soft palate would have been formed, the position of the tongue, the position of the teeth, where the larynx sat in the throat, because you needed to get all of these things in just the right place, and humans could then produce complex sounds. It doesn't mean they couldn't communicate and make sound before that, but they couldn't speak. And why is this so important? Because when you can have complex speech, I can get what's in my brain into your brain. Until then, we could kind of communicate how to hunt and gather and make some tools, but we couldn't look up at the stars and imagine the world and then talk to the person next to us and say, what do you think those are? Why are they like that? It was complex speech that allowed us to get complex thoughts from one person's brain to the next. So what did we see? We saw when this happened, it was a period called the Upper Paleolithic, which is about 50,000 years ago. That's when human speech became complex. And we saw the first ever technology explosion. It wasn't the Industrial Revolution, it was the Upper Paleolithic. Because before then, archaeologists would find things like arrowheads. But that arrowhead might not change for 200,000 or 300,000 years until somebody innovated and made another change. But all of a sudden, in the same period, we're seeing lots of changes because somebody was able to speak and say, hey, you know what? If you put a little notch on that arrowhead, it sticks in the animal better. And then somebody said, yeah, well, what if we do this and do that? And so all of a sudden, there's an explosion of tools happening. But there was another explosion. And that was in terms of what was happening with culture. It was the first cultural explosion. We then saw cave drawings become cave art. We saw the first jewelry being produced. We saw the first ever sculptures being made, and ultimately we saw the first musical instruments. So now, not only could I get complex thoughts from my brain to somebody else's brain, I could begin to get abstract thoughts to people. And this whole process moves forward through the alphabet and writing books so that ultimately I could get what's in my brain into your brain, and I don't even have to be present. I don't have to be in the same room. I don't even have to be alive, and I can get what's in my brain into your brain. So where does this take us? Today we have things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, iPhones, Androids, YouTube, Spotify, I don't know how many more. But what's interesting about all of those companies that I just mentioned, not one of them existed more than 10 years ago. All of them are less than 10 years old. So when I start to look at the future, I start to imagine a world that's going to be very different than the last 10 years. Why would I imagine the next 10 is dominated by those people? Because right now, that's all about the mobile device. More people go on the internet with the mobile device. More people listen to music on their mobile device than any other way. But very quickly, that's changing. Soon we'll be into wearables. I know this one didn't work so well. Everyone knows this. Did anyone ever try the Google Glass? It was a bit painful to use. Now we have the Apple Watch. Again, hasn't completely taken off yet, but it doesn't mean wearables aren't coming, and coming fast. We then have virtual reality, which is right on the forefront. And if we're not creating for that, then we're missing a big trick. And then we quickly go into implantables. This is a friend of mine, Neil Harbison. Does anyone know who Neil is? A couple of you. What's interesting about Neil is he has a very particular disorder, and that means he can't see in color. He can only see in black and white. So what he did was he created a little camera that takes the visual spectrum, the rainbow, and it transposes it to an octave of music, so he can essentially hear color. He then had that camera permanently implanted into his skull. So now he can sense color. I won't even say that he hears it, because it's not going through his eyes and it's not going through his ears. It's a new sense. He can now perceive color when he didn't used to be. But why stop there? If he can see the visual spectrum, what's stopping him from seeing ultraviolet or infrared? So now he worked on the software, and he can now sense ultraviolet. Imagine going outside. We can sense, is it sunny? Is it cold? Is it warm? He can sense those things too, and he can also sense, is there a lot of UV rays? Because nowadays we know that's dangerous. He can detect that. We can't. And every one of us in this room will soon be a cyborg, like Neil. I'm not sure if you all believe me. You will all be cyborgs, part man, part machine. Last year, my wife's parents were visiting us from Italy. And the night before they were going home, my father-in-law started to suffer a heart attack. They rushed him to the emergency room, and he underwent surgery that night, where they implanted this in his chest, this pacemaker. This pacemaker that is updated by the doctor remotely, that can send signals back and forth. The software in it can be updated, and the doctor can now be notified. My 75-year-old father-in-law is already a cyborg. So what kind of problems does all of this bring as we get into the next decade of the 21st century? In 1971, there was an economist named Herbert Alexander Simon. And he said, in an information-rich world, the wealth of information means the dearth of something, a scarcity of whatever it is that information consumes. So let me slow down a second. What he said was, and remember, this is 1971, more than 20 years before the World Wide Web. He said we're going to be bombarded by information. And this wealth of information is going to create a scarcity. And what he was talking about was the attention economy. He coined that phrase and said, information will create the scarcity of our time and attention, and that we won't be consuming information, it will be consuming us. And now we start to see it. What we've moved from is this product-based world of the Industrial Revolution to the attention economy, where it's a competition for everybody's time and attention. It's not can you sell them something, it's can you have them pay attention to whatever it is you have to say. And now that we're doing this, people are actually getting the information differently. They're collecting it from their digital devices. But let me tell you something about my friend Neil Harbison and his apparatus that sees color. He's now connected and can remotely sense. That means he's connected. If somebody across the world that he's friends with wants to look at something, they can, and it goes directly into his head. He is now remotely sensing. This is the world we're going to be in. Information is going to come directly to us. There is nothing sacred about the containers of information. I know people get really passionate about books. I don't really care about books. I care about the information that's contained in them. I mean, when the printing press came along, did people go, this sucks? I used to love the days when I could read on animal skins, drink my Turkish coffee and just read there. And people, no, it was great on stone tablets. I don't care. As long as somebody can get what's in their brain into my brain, not only do I not care about the vessel that it's contained in, whether it's a piece of vinyl, a CD, or a book, I also don't care about the delivery method. I just want to know that it's coming directly to me. So now what I'm saying is we're going to see a whole bunch of content creators, a whole bunch of artists starting to create differently because of the technology that's being developed today. They're going to have to create new technology for wearables, new technology for virtual reality, and new technology for implantables. And this is not some sort of futuristic view that I'm guessing on. I'm telling you 100% this is the world we're moving in. And I forgot who it was earlier that was talking about, Noah didn't start building the ark after it rained. He started building it before it rained. Before the flood happens, you have to start creating differently. And artists always will. Do you guys know Jimi Hendrix? Jimi Hendrix didn't think of a new way to create music. Somebody handed him a piece of technology, an electric guitar and an amplifier, and he created all new content. And that's the world we're in today. Thank you very much.